Welcome back to the Stories of Northern Life podcast, brought to you by the Sault Ste. Marie Museum. I'm your host, Nicole, and today, in another episode of our Queer Project, I will be sharing the story of one of our most influential community members. If you guessed that I was talking about Mother Goderre, then you're correct. Mother Goderre helped to build a safe space for the queer community from the 1960s on.
Warning: the following contains discussions of discrimination, BIPOC, sex identity, explicit language, and other mature content. Listener discretion is advised, especially for those under 13. We have kept these interviews intact to preserve the voices of our guests.
In 1998-1999, Roy Mitchell released the film I Know a Place. It talks about Roy's journey of growing up gay and not seeing a queer community around him, so realizing he had to go to Toronto to live and be himself. But by working at the still plant and then joining a play, he finds the underground scene, which led him to Bob and Jean-Guy's parties. And years later, he came back to do an interview with Bob to get this remarkable story documented. But before we get too much into that, let's look at who Mother Goderre was. Born Robert, or Bob, Eugene Goderre to Anselm, or Sam, and Marie Goderre in Hull, Quebec on December 3rd, 1923. Then, when he was still young, they packed up everything in their vehicle and came to the Sault, as his dad was looking for work. Bob said all of the furniture and kids were piled in the vehicle, and it took 5 days to make their way to the Sault. In 1938, I can see that they were attending St. Ignatius Church, and Bob, his sister Pierrette, and brother Lionel joined the Children's Eucharist Crusade. Also, in November 1938, there was a whole article on Bob hosting a class party. So even back then, he was hosting parties. Each week, the students at St. Ignatius School held a party in aid of foreign missions. Robert hosted the party on the week of November 17th, 1938. It was said to be a jolly evening, playing cards and bingo. He quit school early so he could work at the Algonquin Hotel. He had many different jobs there, including bellhop, chambermaid, night clerk, day clerk, etc. Then came World War II and the draft. He wanted to get out of the war, so he came up with this idea, and he asked his sister to help him cut off his finger, but she refused. So he tried to do it on his own. So he swung the axe and then passed out. Next thing he knew, he was waking up and a splint was on his finger and they were saying he was going to be okay. So back to war he went, and a month later they took off the splint, and now his finger was sort of locked in a trigger position, and he said after that his trigger finger was better than ever. Luckily, he never actually had to fire a gun in combat. One day, while he was in the cafeteria, he heard a message over the loudspeakers saying they were looking for nurses, so he eagerly signed up. He loved being a nurse. He said he got to wear a nice white uniform and have good meals. There were several announcements in the Sault Star of Private Bob Goderre returning home on leave to see his parents. However, in August 1944, he received the horrible news that his 17-year-old brother, Ed Perriard, drowned. A July 1945 announcement a few months before the end of the war in the Pacific on September 2nd, 1945, says that Private Bob Goderre was on his way home and that he had been serving overseas since 1943. He was stationed in France, Belgium, Holland, and Germany. He went overseas on the same ship with his brother Dick, but they never met afterwards. While he was home on leave in July 1945, he did an interview with the Sault Star. The article is titled, "Bob Goderre Saw Blood Plasma Revive Half Dead." The article was meant to encourage people to attend the blood donor clinic. They talk of his work with the Royal Canadian Army Medical Corps as an orderly. He talked of how he saw the marvels performed by the use of plasma. Quote, "It is a great thing. It saved a lot of lives through France and Belgium. The med would come in half dead and a transfusion would revive them. It's a wonderful thing." End quote. Here we learn he joined the Army in December 1942 and went overseas in June 1943. He worked at the steel plant and the Sault Star before he signed up, and then he also served in the Field Dressing Station, or FDS, in England, and then went to France with the 21st FDS. Their duties kept them close to the lines most of the time. Then they acted as a hospital in Holland and Germany as they were moving up. And Bob's medical unit was actually the first to cross the Rhine and set up an advanced dressing station. They ran a general hospital until the end of the war, and then set up a hospital for 500 patients from a slave labor camp at Delmenhorst. He said after the war in the Pacific was done, he would love to return home and have, quote, "a nice little restaurant." In March 1946, Bob was stationed at Monteith and was to report to Toronto for his discharge. While in the war, he talks of how he slept with a lot of other soldiers, but you never mentioned or talked about the word gay. When he was home after the war, he attended dances, and one evening at the Columbia Hall, he met Elma Berard. They began to hang out, and after a week, she said that they should make it official and get married. Their engagement was announced February 2nd, 1947, and they were married Monday, February 17th, 1947. In 1948, their son Frankie was born. At this time, they were living on Alexandra Street. In 1950, their son Robert Jr. was born, and they were on Dennis Street. And then in 1953, they welcomed their son Jerry. In the film I Know a Place, Bob talks about his love of hockey and how when it was on, he wouldn't answer the phone or the door. He was only focused on the game. In 1952, Bob was in the news as being the loudest fan and cheerleader for the Hounds. I guess he had really shouted up a storm that night. Bob and Alma would attend several dances over the years, and in 1952 they even won a spot dance prize. So again, Bob loved dancing. I think that Bob may have also played broomball in the Steel Plant League, but I'm not too sure. Maybe there was another Bob Goderre at the steel plant. He said that the boys at the steel plant were always nice to him, even after they found out that he was gay. He was a big car operator, taking the bins to the furnace to have their contents melted down. In the film, I found out more about his personal life that we just can't see from these news articles. So he began to attend parties in Sudbury. His wife, I think, knew he was gay and knew that he was going to these parties. And Bob even says he knew all he was, and Bob himself says he knew all his life he was gay. He always told himself that if he met the man he wanted to be with, or he said live with, then he would divorce his wife. And so, at one party, he saw Jean-Guy LeBlanc and fell in love instantly. He finally divorced his wife. He loved her, and even after the divorce, they stayed friends and were great co-parents. He asked Jean-Guy to move in, and they lived upstairs while Elma and the boys lived downstairs. His sons liked Jean-Guy, and so did his sisters, and two of his brothers who were also gay, but as for the other brothers, he wasn't too sure. He says that his coworkers accepted Jean-Guy too. Jean-Guy was ready to fix anything around the house, and Bob busied himself with the cooking, and he called himself the housewife. Although he never opened his restaurant, he did cook and feed the queer community of the Sioux. Bob and Jean-Guy began hosting dances in their basement. Their first basement they had, the ceiling was actually so low. Bob talks about how at some of the dances, people were cutting their heads on the ceiling. So after they moved to their other home on Wellington, they made sure that they had a higher ceiling in the basement. So their house on Wellington became so well known in the underground queer community, and everybody knew that every second weekend they were going to be hosting the dances. So on Friday, the out-of-town visitors would arrive and they would party and have drinks. Saturday night was the big dance, and Sunday was the brunch. Everyone would help out, and sometimes they had 50 to 60 people at those dances. Sometimes Bob said they had up to 75 people there. Bob and Jean-Guy's place was a safe space, and often the first time people got to experience the underground queer community in the Sioux. At that time, there wasn't really any other place for them to gather, to dance and celebrate and just be themselves. Bob had a rule that he never drank or smoked on the dance floor so that he could keep an eye on his flock. It was this care that earned him the nickname Mother. He shares a funny story of how during one Halloween party, and I think this was hosted in the old flea market building that was on King Street, based on the reenactment that they did in the film. And so during the dance, there was a lot of guys dressed in drag, and then all of a sudden the doors open and in walk two cops. The cop said, "Sorry, but you don't have a license. You have to go." So they all head out and go to Bob's to finish the party. Bob says it must have been a sight to see a gaggle of drag queens making their way down the street. For 14 years, it was just Bob and Jean-Guy giving the dances. But near the 1980s, the community was getting too big and, quote, sophisticated, as Roy Mitchell puts it in his documentary. So they wanted to move outside of the basement parties. But Bob and Jean-Guy's basement was always the headquarters and safe place that anybody could go. Sudbury and Sioux, Michigan also had their own gay community leaders that provided safe spaces and dances and events. When Bob and Jean-Guy were celebrating their 25th anniversary, Bob made a board of everyone he had lost. And during the interview he did with Roy for the film, he talks about how he has more people to add. One of them being Jean-Guy. After 29 years together, Jean-Guy passed away from AIDS-related complications on December 2nd, 1996. Bob was devastated by this, and although he tried to continue on in his home they shared, he found it too difficult. So, in 1998, he moved down to Kingston to be closer to his sons. He wrote beautiful poems to Jean-Guy that were published in the Sioux Star that was a testament of how much they loved each other. He continued to love and support the Hounds also when he was down in Kingston. On December 7th, 2009, Bob passed away, and in his obituary it notes that he was Mother Goderre, a spokesperson for the gay community in the Sioux, and we will be missed by many friends. Although Bob wasn't the only one to set up queer-friendly events, and spaces and create this welcoming community. There have also been many others over the years, like Murray Carson and many others. If you want to share your story about being part of the queer community in the Sioux, or if you knew any of these community leaders who are no longer with us, please reach out and share these stories with us before they are lost to history. So, thanks for listening. Bye.
Did you know you can get unlimited admission to the Sault Ste. Marie Museum for a whole year for just $15? Yep, that's right, and there's more perks to that too. Go to Sault Museum, that's SAULT museum.ca, under Visit and learn more about our membership options. And if you're a business, corporate or nonprofit, we have plans for you too. Reach out to us by emailing info@saultmuseum.ca with any inquiries.
Today's quote comes from Sault Ste. Marie, City by the Rapids, an illustrated history by Francis M. Heath. The quote is from a 1866 diary entry of David Pym. Quote, "There were 304 souls in the school district, and of that, 79 were between the ages of 5 and 16 years. Heretofore, no provision had been made for the education of the children at Sault Ste. Marie. Mr. William Turner was the first person paid by the town, and he gathered 50 out of the 79 scholars available." End quote.